Man jailed for posting online during public disorder. Retired police officer arrested over thought crime tweet. Jailed for a Facebook post. If you're American, you've probably seen headlines like these and thought, yikes, Britain arrests people for tweets? Thank God we have freedom of speech. In fact, this is a popular comment format I see on my videos comparing the US and the UK all the time. Bro, you're living in a country where people are getting arrested for making comments online. I've had American family members message me asking if I'm gonna get a knock at the door for saying the wrong thing in one of these videos. And a lot of this traces back to one number that's gone viral.
And most importantly, they've already arrested 12,000 people for social media posts.
That's insane.
Above and beyond every other country. Any criticism of immigration, any talk about how horrible this is, they come visit you. It's like someone's trying to destroy England.
Here's the tweet that Joe gets his information from. 12,183 arrests. Sounds pretty scary, right? Well, here's the thing. This 12,183 number isn't exactly made up. In fact, it comes from real UK data tied to two very specific communications laws. But this chart does something really sneaky the more you look into it. And remember those three headlines I opened the video with? Well, sorry to tell you, but one of them actually came from America. And another would likely get you arrested in the US too, despite the Constitution. My name is Edinger, and I grew up with the First Amendment. Then I spent the last 13 years of my life in Britain. After having lived in both systems, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what freedom of speech actually means. So today, I'm going to be explaining how freedom of speech actually works in both countries, and the harsh reality of where both of them get it wrong.
So it is very important I start off this conversation by saying that Prime Minister Keir Starmer has done an absolutely awful job of handling this discussion on free speech and is the human equivalent of a pre-dunked biscuit. And I have every right to call him out for that, because political speech is protected within the UK. I can publicly say, I've had live-scale filled kettles with more personality than the Prime Minister and be completely fine. So long as I don't cross a line and cause serious harm to their reputation through false statements, as that would be a breach of Defamation Act 2013. And it is quite difficult to harm someone's reputation when it's already so far in the gutter. I also couldn't threaten violence against him, because that'd be what they say is a bit of a dick move. But also, it would be breaking Communications Act 2003, Section 127, and possibly more depending on what I said. And that's not because he's a public official or a politician. These laws protect everyone in Britain. But in the USA, could I publicly say these things against someone? Well, the political opinions, sure. But the threats? Not quite. The US has very similar protections, such as 18 U.S.C. 875C. I think the UK naming convention is a little better, but this law makes it a federal crime to transmit an interstate communication, aka something said in this video or a tweet, containing a threat to injure a person. And then on top of that, each of the 50 states can set additional laws limiting different types of speech. Like this Texas man who was so upset last year that the San Antonio mayor wanted to slow down the construction of a new sports complex that he allegedly tweeted, "We need to kill the mayor." Well, that was enough. This American man was swiftly arrested for the thing he posted about online, which not only breaks the above law, but also the extra Texan laws against threatening a public servant. He could have just tweeted his opinions about the mayor with no problems at all. He could have said how much he dislikes her or how much he doesn't like her decisions, and that speech would be fully protected, just like in the UK. But then if both countries protect political speech, well, why do so many Brits still end up getting arrested for social media posts? Welcome, my friends, to the meat of the video. Well, it's about time we finally make sense of this number. You're probably thinking, here's where Evan tells me that the number is in reality smaller. Well, actually, the real number this is supposed to represent is most definitely larger. It's just not what you think it is. 12,183 is the number of arrests that were made in the UK for alleged offenses under two specific communications laws: Communications Act 2003, Section 127, and Malicious Communications Act 1988, Section 1. But not all police forces reported, so this number could in fact be larger. The more important thing to consider here is what counts as breaking these laws. And what does this number truly represent? These are communications laws. Communications can be a public tweet, sure, but it also covers a very wide range of situations like stalking, harassment, intimidation, and threats. In fact, if we look at the Freedom of Information request of the police force in Cleveland, not Ohio, it's in Yorkshire, by the way, we can see that of the 99 people in 2023 they arrested for these comms offenses, only 34 were recorded as cyber-enabled. So 2/3 of the arrests couldn't possibly be social media at all. Even so, if you move the goalposts on this disinformation campaign just a little bit, you could still be thinking, well, sure, that 12,000 number has been made 66% smaller based on this sample from Cleveland, but that's 4,000. That number is still way too big. But the number also does get smaller when you consider that less than 10% of those arrested for this in 2023 actually got sentenced. So now we're left with an estimated 400 or so, down from over 12,000. But if you turn on the right-wing news of your choice, this is how the situation is actually covered.
Our next guest has been fighting against censorship of free speech in the UK. He is Grammy Award-winning rock star and former banjoist with Mumford & Sons' Winston Marshall.
It is absolutely normal for families to meet and discuss what to do if the police come knocking at the door. I had this conversation with my partner a year ago. This is normal now in Britain to have a protocol. Get the phone, start recording. All of this. It's a very, very dark place we have become.
If you're not getting your political takes from a former banjoist, what are you doing? What are you doing? Come on, this guy used to play banjo. He used to play banjo. It is absolutely normal for families to meet and discuss what to do when the police come knocking at your door. Oh yes, it's something I have to discuss with my family all the time. Oh Heather, I'm so scared of... Well, what is it actually I'd be afraid of? Why would the police be knocking at my door? You see, it's not normal at all to say that, not in 99.9% of families in Britain. This is a very strange self-admission. I can't imagine having to sit my daughter down and be like, honey, at some point the police might demand to take your daddy away because, well, daddy wants to post things online about wanting to burn down the local mosque, and supposedly that's against the law. If only we had freedom of speech. And that's not a random example. Let's look at some of the social media arrests that actually made it to sentencing. Are local heroes of free speech? Maybe, in fact, I'm being too harsh. Also important to note here is that none of these occurred in a vacuum, but a lot of them occurred during the tense period around the Southport riots. A British citizen from Cardiff murdered 3 young girls in Merseyside. Far-right disinformation spread on Twitter claimed the man was not from Cardiff, not British at all. In fact, they said he was an asylum-seeking Muslim. Well, this disinformation spread really fast and led to some Brits attacking the hotels that were keeping refugees safe, also making the employees of the hotel fear for their lives, but who cares about that? I saw something crazy on Twitter and I just had to blow up a hotel. Locals from all backgrounds pitched in to clean up after the riots. It's quite wholesome, all things considered, and some media publications covered that with images like this one. But one Cheshire local saw an image like this online and posted, "It's absolutely ridiculous! Don't protect the mosques! Blow the mosques up with the adults in it." Lord! Well, she was sentenced to 1 year and 3 months in jail for sending a communication that conveys a threat of death or serious harm, as per the Online Safety Act of 2023. Meanwhile, this man from Leeds posted, "Every man and their dog should be smashing out Britannia Hotel." And when someone said they'd join in, he replied he'd be there at 5. When asked why, Parler said, quote, "Because they're, over here, given life of Riley off the tax us hard-working people earn, when it could be put to better use." Adequately said. Yeah, I don't know, maybe we should put more money into the education budget. 20 months in prison for that man. And he pleaded guilty of an offense to publishing written material which is threatening, abusive, or insulting, intending thereby to stir up racial hatred, which is explicitly against the Public Order Act of 1986, Section 19. And Lucy Connolly is the most famous example for this, for tweeting, "Set fire to all the fucking hotels full of the bastards for all I care. If that makes me a racist, so be it." And surprise, surprise, it does! And so she went to prison for the same reason. Now, I didn't know any of these specific laws before researching this video. I bet you didn't either, but neither of us probably needed a law to tell us maybe not stir up racial hatred or encourage arson, right? It's really not that hard. So for most in Britain, free speech is free speech because they aren't telling others to burn down hotels in their day-to-day lives. But these were some of the cases that were all over the news where the original communications offenses led to the guilty being prosecuted under additional laws that they also broke. A less viral case where people were sentenced for breaking the communications laws that were included in that 12,183 figure is one of a woman who faked her own pregnancy and sent her ex hundreds of messages, sometimes calling him 200 times a day, harassing him in emotionally manipulative ways about his child that didn't in fact exist. Like the first season of Glee, but during lockdown. Police showed up at the door to find there was no baby, but what they did find was a 3-year history of overwhelmingly harassing online communications, and real-world ones too. Do you think that should be legal? Do you think the police shouldn't have arrested her for that? Because this is the sort of thing that is wrapped up in that disingenuous number regurgitated by those without any critical thinking ability. But here's a question. Would any of these people have been sent to prison in the US should they have done the same thing? Well, it's not quite encouraging blowing a mosque up, but this Mississippi man was arrested for threatening to burn down an officer's home. It is peculiar, isn't it, that many of the UK arrests are for hate speech and threats targeting minorities and protected classes, whereas in the US, the only speech they seem to arrest for is to protect those in power, like cops or elected officials. Interesting that. Very similar to the Southport riots, this Chicago man turned to Facebook to encourage people to loot and riot downtown, saying, "Let's get ready to steal, bitches!" When someone warned him, saying, "Hey, a screenshot of what you said is going around social media," he replied simply, "Damn, freedom of speech." Beautiful. Couldn't have said it any better myself. And of course, he was arrested for the post he made online. Really exemplifies most Americans' understanding of their own freedom of speech laws. And a San Francisco man is quoted as saying, "You're gonna take me to jail for Facebook?" Right before getting sent to jail for Facebook. For leaving this comment encouraging burning down the house of a law enforcement official. Another example of American free speech laws protecting those up rather than those down. A lot of times the freedom of speech violations that get the biggest coverage in the news are less about the law and the violations that took place and more about if the slant of the newspaper or online pundit agrees with what was actually said that was deemed offensive. So when ex-comedy writer Graham Linehan encourages people on Twitter to punch trans people in the balls, the people and publications most upset at his arrest are usually those who condone that sort of violence, and they subsequently write about him like, well, he's a hero standing up for free speech. A hero that in court was cleared for harassing transgender activists. Hold on, let me just scroll down and actually read the article. But guilty of criminal damage to their phone. So the hero of free speech couldn't actually handle the speech of a 17-year-old child, so took her phone at an event and broke it. Well, nothing says I stand for free speech and I want to protect the children like attacking children for their speech. Makes a lot of sense. But Linehan's arrest and most all of these supposed free speech arrests usually only fall into one of two buckets. The first bucket is the one we've already been through: threats, stirring up racial hatred, harassment, etc. The other bucket, even though it is a much rarer case, it still happens and is the one where I think the UK's freedom of speech fails the most. Sure, over 90% of people arrested for these communications acts in the UK were not sentenced, so assumably there was not enough evidence to convict. But for them, those that were arrested when they really shouldn't have, it shows a big problem with the UK's current policing strategy, regardless of if you agree with them or not. The issue is, if a crime is reported to the police, it is their job to investigate it. Some might argue that online crimes are a lot easier to investigate because there's quite a paper trail. Sometimes the level of investigation is completely out of order, and when the punishment for encouraging violence online can look harsher than the actual punishment for the violence that people actually commit, people understandably lose trust in the system. Over the 13 years that I've lived here, I've really begun to appreciate the UK's free speech. But when this one news story came out last year, I started to have my doubts. Maxie and Rosalind were detained in January by Hertfordshire police and left in a police cell for 8 hours after a dispute with their eldest daughter's school. And when you read that, you might think, oh, well, what? Were they threatening the school? Harassing them? Stirring up racial hatred? No. You see, this couple committed the horrible, horrible crime of complaining about the primary school administrators in a private, local WhatsApp group. Anything racist? Nope. Any, threats? No. But the mom involved did report to say the administrator hadn't got a clue about anything. Ooh, sick burn. And that they had little spies in the WhatsApp groups, and they need to, quote, get a life. So one of the little spies reported this crime to the police, who then showed up with 6 police officers at their door. There was no crime committed. The police should never have been involved here. Even if the couple had multiple past grievances with the administrators at this school, there's absolutely nothing wrong with whinging. It's in fact part of British culture in itself. Complaining online, and not even so, in a private local group. Nothing wrong with a whinge. Nothing wrong with a little bit of that gossip. It's not even supposed to get back to them. If it does, they're supposed to go, what are you gonna do? You can't please everybody. Imagine if I just did that, trying to, sue every single comment, get every single comment that ever doesn't like my videos arrested. It's just insane. That's also not what the law is for. That is why we have all these articles coming out. And yet, even though the police have since paid the couple £20,000 for the mistake, and they said, quote, legal test around necessity of arrest was not met in this instance, they also say no officer committed any misconduct. Oh yeah, here's 20 grand for the mistake we made. By the way, we didn't make any mistakes. Okay, sure, that's cool. Yet again, really makes people have faith in the system. The thing is here, there are a couple other cases like this, each examples of the police making a very bad judgment call based on their interpretation of if one of these communication laws was actually broken. I know that the cops paid this couple for the mistake in this scenario, and every other similar instance that I did read about, I saw the cops saying that the person should not have been arrested and it was a mistake, but that means that even if this is a rare case, well, the police need to increase their training to prevent this from happening, or at least raise the threshold for moving something towards an investigation into an arrest. This is where I began to feel like maybe the US's freedom of speech model is better for this specific use case, until I saw that America is honestly having the same problems despite their more open speech laws. After conservative ideologue Charlie Kirk was shot, one man from Tennessee decided to share a meme about it on Facebook. In fact, the meme was of President Trump saying, "We have to get over it," in response to yet another school shooting. It was an apt comparison. It was the president's actual words, and it was a meme. This man was arrested and thrown in jail, no, not just for 8 hours, for 37 days. The officers claimed his post was threatening mass violence at a school. Somehow? So basically, making something up to throw someone in jail that they disagreed with. Doesn't sound too much like freedom of speech, right? Oh, but Evan, the police, they shouldn't have done that. It was, well, yes, and that's the same type of thing that's happening in the UK with those sorts of buckets. You either get the stirring up racial hatred bucket, or you get the police basically abusing their power or making a mistake, or both. And this is not a one-off. An Ohio man was arrested for making a parody Facebook page of his local police station. That happened before Trump came into power. I guess parody isn't free speech anymore, is it? The US has also recently been targeting people attending peaceful protests and allowing ICE officials to kill protesters and face no repercussions whatsoever. So much for the right to protest and the right to a fair trial. And Trump's government has been using the FCC and the threat of license and regulatory action against any news network that dares to accurately report what his government is up to, and thus limiting the free press supposedly protected by the First Amendment. In every single instance, the US, more than the UK, has actually been cracking down on its freedom of speech laws. At least with the UK, they have a basis of very specific laws to refer to it for why it has its limits. Like, yes, we have freedom of speech, but not this type. Whereas, even though Americans think their First Amendment gives them more freedom of speech, if the government just ignores it and arrests you anyway, throws you in jail, or shoots you in your car, well, then that law is only worth the paper it's written on. It requires a thick level of cognitive dissonance to see the US government and its elected officials breaking the law so brazenly out in the open, and yet still believing that the law gives you some sort of protection. It doesn't. If the law doesn't work for everyone, the law doesn't work for anyone. And it doesn't help that the American exceptionalism drilled into you in school, that the US is the only country in the world that has real free speech, has led you to believe that, when in reality, most Western nations have free speech, but a different set of values. Because you still might be under the impression that countries not America don't have free speech against the will of the people. Like, everyone in these countries is just so desperate and clamoring for that American-style free speech, or at least the one that you were taught that you have in school. That cannot be further from the truth. The free speech laws Britain developed, for instance, are ones that the majority of Brits actually agree with. According to a recent YouGov poll around speech on social media, the majority of Brits responded that it is more important that people are safe from abuse and threats than that people are able to speak their minds freely. And most Brits I know appreciate our free speech laws, how they're written, and who they protect. The laws match the cultures and sensitivities of the people here. I see American pundits all the time saying, Brits don't have freedom of speech because they made it illegal to pray outside of abortion clinics. What about freedom of religion for Christians? What about freedom to pray? Well, it's not quite prayer, is it? But according to a recent YouGov poll, 77% of Brits support the ban on this protest. Why? Because they recognize abortion as healthcare, and healthcare as a human right, and they wanted the women needing to get an abortion to feel safe doing so without being harassed by a group of people virtue signaling at the door. Your rights of freedom of speech are protected, but they do not supersede anyone else's rights to privacy, dignity, and access to lawful healthcare. In the UK view, that is the point of rights. They sit alongside each other, and when they collide, you draw a line where the harm is most concrete. The harm here is targeted pressure at the exact moment someone is trying to exercise a legal medical choice. So the restriction is not, you cannot be Christian, you cannot pray. It's more, you cannot do something that functions as intimidation of someone else in a specific designated buffer zone. Do that in your own free time, sure, but do not do something pretending as if you've got this shield of religion when in reality, you're just trying to intimidate people to not access the healthcare they're legally entitled to. But despite all the online rhetoric that might lead you to believe that Americans would be against this sort of thing, the data we have from surveys paints a more nuanced picture. Interestingly enough, according to a survey conducted by Pew Research, teens in America have a very similar belief as Brits when it comes to prioritizing people feeling safe over the ability to speak their minds freely online. But this sensibility does seem to dwindle with age. And according to a different poll, 81% of Americans agree that we should generally discourage people from expressing views that advocate violence against others, with a further 58% agreeing that we should discourage people from expressing views that advocate removing the civil rights of others. It's quite simple, right? Sure, if you break it down party lines, Americans that identify as Republicans seem to be much more accepting of taking away the civil rights of others, but overall, that's not the case. But the real question is, does the current American version of free speech actually align with the will of the people? The true test of a law is not when it works, but when it doesn't work. People getting arrested over speech and then released because there isn't enough evidence is one kind of failure. Protesters getting shot to death by officials and then branded domestic terrorists by the state is another. When I moved to this country, I was of the firm belief instilled in me in school that all speech should be allowed, and that hate speech and even lies should also be allowed, because you can always have speech on the other side showing how the hate speech is wrong and proving that the lies are untrue. This is the utopian world of the equal sides debate that I was brought up in, the free speech dream I was taught, and I would strongly defend many years into my life in the UK. Then I experienced life in the ever-shifting online world. People aren't just standing on street corners sharing their opinions anymore. There is no free exchange of ideas in a world where purposefully false statements are spread through online algorithms to millions of people, where before anyone can even take the time to fact-check any claims, a further 10 have already been made and spread, causing real-world harm. I never expected to change my opinion on free speech. Similar to most topics I was taught in America, it's taught with the understanding that anything different from America's current system, any system any other country has come up with, is a step down. Because America's is best. Because America is best. This is one of the main reasons so many Americans struggle after visiting Europe, because they're faced with the uncomfortable reality that some parts of American life might not actually be the best, despite the American education system's best efforts to convince them otherwise. I mean, the fact that when we're taught about different countries, we're taught about Europe, you're never ever really taught about modern Europe. Modern anywhere, you're always taught the history of it that gave way to America. Almost like as soon as America was founded, everything over there doesn't exist. They're not really having anything modern, and the only things that you hear about modern are, oh, but the freedom of speech is going bad. They're having really big issues over there. Oh, we've got knife crime. Even though none of those are actually problems, and if they are, they're literally worse in the US, which I've made an entire video about. It's just so... it's embarrassing, really. But after years of living in both systems and a lot of introspective thought, for the time being, I prefer the freedom of speech that I have in the UK, the real freedom of speech, not the warped sense you read about online. It took me a long time to fully understand the actual differences between free speech rights in both countries. I mean, even as recent as 2024, I was still leaning a bit towards the US's model, because, well, without looking too deeply into it, I would just take in the news stories of when British police would wrongly arrest someone and mentally conclude that, well, that sort of thing would never be able to happen in the US, despite the fact that it very often does. Both systems very much have their failings, and neither is perfect. And there is no objectively correct system, because they each have pros and cons. So long as you don't want to encourage violence, threats, harassment, or stirring up racial hatred, you have the freedom to express yourself in Britain quite well. At the end of the day, the major confusion here, outside of the purposeful misinformation, is on the differing definitions of the term freedom of speech. German law, for instance, chooses not to use this term at all, but opts for the German word for freedom to express one's opinion, freie Meinungsäußerung. One is guaranteed the right to express and disseminate opinions, but that does not entitle one to trample on others' rights or deny historical facts. How you define freedom of speech depends on what you were taught it's for. If your definition is, I can say anything with zero consequences, well, no country really has that. But if your definition is, I can speak my mind without fear, as long as I'm not using speech to harm, then Britain and America are arguing about the same value in two different accents. Americans are trained to fear restrictions. Brits are trained to fear abuse. The truth is, both fears are valid. The question is, which one you want your society to prioritize when the two inevitably collide. Welcome to the outro in this very bright room. The sun is out, and I'm not going to complain about it because it's actually really lovely in Britain right now. But if you want to know how lovely it actually is in London, I have made an entire video about that. Only because a lot of people seem to think it's unsafe, because right-wing media in the US is like, Britain is falling, everyone's dying all the time, and so much of it is fake AI slop, so I made a video all about that. So click that if you haven't watched it yet. Otherwise, I'll see you back on my YouTube channel next Sunday. Goodbye.
12,183 bongs. Ben! Classic. Gonna wait for 3 bongs and then we'll carry on.